The daily mockery. The kitchen of Maison Dorée hummed with the familiar symphony of sizzling pans and shouted orders. Elijah Novak wiped a bead of sweat from his brow as he plated another perfect scallop dish, his movements precise and confident. At 32, he had earned his position as sous chef at one of Montreal's most celebrated restaurants through undeniable talent and relentless ambition. "Order up," he called, sliding the plate toward a server who approached with practiced caution. Elijah's culinary skills were matched only by his reputation for brutal criticism of those who failed to meet his standards. "She's back again," whispered Danielle, one of the waitresses, as she collected the plate. "Table 7, fourth Tuesday in a row." Elijah's eyes drifted toward the dining room. Through the kitchen's service window, he could see her, a woman in her early 40s, dressed in simple but elegant clothes, dining alone. Nothing particularly remarkable about her, except for her solitude in a restaurant where tables were typically booked months in advance by couples and groups celebrating special occasions. "Ah, our Tuesday charity case," Elijah smirked. "What's she ordering this time? Let me guess, the safest item on the menu?" "The bouillabaisse again," Danielle confirmed. "And just sparkling water." Elijah rolled his eyes dramatically, making sure the other kitchen staff noticed his disdain. How adventurous. A woman who comes to a restaurant with 3 Michelin recommendations and orders the same dish every time. Probably saving up all month for her little weekly indulgence. The line cooks chuckled, eager to stay on Elijah's good side. His mockery of customers had become something of a ritual, especially those he deemed unworthy of Maison Doré's culinary artistry. "Maybe she's a food critic," joked Pascal, the pastry chef. "Please," Elijah scoffed, tossing a pinch of finishing. Salt with theatrical flair. "Critics make themselves known. They order half the menu, take photos, make notes. This one, she's just sad. Probably lives alone with a dozen cats, and this is her big excitement for the week." As the evening progressed, Elijah found himself glancing at table 7 more often than he cared to admit. The woman ate slowly, methodically, with none of the performative appreciation typical of food enthusiasts. No photos, no excessive comments. To servers, just quiet contemplation between bites. When Chef Moreau, the executive chef and owner, popped into the kitchen to check on service, Elijah couldn't resist commenting. "The Tuesday regular is back, still ordering the bouillabaisse." Chef Moreau, a stern man in his 50s, glanced toward the dining room. "The dish is popular for a reason, Elijah. Not everyone needs to prove their culinary sophistication through obscure choices." "It's the safest thing on the menu," Elijah persisted. "Someone who appreciates good food would explore more." "Sometimes," Chef Moreau replied with unexpected sharpness. "The greatest sophistication lies in knowing exactly what you want." He turned back to Elijah with narrowed eyes. "Your béarnaise is breaking. Focus on your station instead of judging my customers." The reprimand stung. Elijah turned back to his work, irritation simmering beneath his composed exterior. As closing time approached and the dining room emptied, he spotted Danielle collecting the woman's payment. "Did she leave her usual mediocre tip?" he called, out when Danielle returned to the kitchen. "Actually," Danielle said, a strange expression crossing her face, "she left this for you." She held out a folded napkin. Puzzled, Elijah took it. Inside was a handwritten note in elegant script. "The bouillabaisse speaks of technique, but lacks soul. Too much saffron masks the sea. Sometimes the simplest dishes reveal the most about a chef. Perhaps next Tuesday." Elijah stared at the note, heat rising to his face. Who did this woman think she was? And more troublingly, how did she know he had prepared the bouillabaisse tonight? "What does it say?" Pascal asked, curiosity piqued by Elijah's sudden silence. Elijah crumpled the napkin and tossed it into the trash. "Nothing important," he muttered. Just another customer who thinks watching cooking shows makes them an expert. But as he cleaned his station that night, the woman's words echoed in his mind. Too much saffron. Lacks soul. For the first time in years, Elijah felt something he had nearly forgotten. The sting of criticism aimed at him. Unexpected critique. The following Tuesday arrived with the first snow of Montreal's winter, dusting the streets with a delicate layer of white. Elijah had spent the week trying to forget the mysterious woman's note, but her words had wormed their way into his consciousness. He'd made the bouillabaisse 3 times at home, adjusting the saffron, experimenting with the base stock, reluctantly admitting to himself that perhaps, just perhaps, she had a point. "She's here," announced Danielle, her breath creating a small cloud in the chilly kitchen where the back door had been propped open to cool the overheated space. Elijah straightened his chef's coat. "Table 7?" "As always," Danielle confirmed, giving him a curious look. It wasn't like Elijah to care about specific customers. "I'll take her order myself," he said suddenly, ignoring the surprised glances from his colleagues. The dining room of Maison Dorée was a carefully orchestrated space of warm lighting, exposed brick, and white tablecloths. Elijah rarely ventured out during service, preferring the controlled chaos of his kitchen to the performative politeness required with diners. Yet here he was, approaching table 7 with an uncharacteristic uncertainty in his step. "Good evening," he said, standing, perhaps too stiffly beside her table. "I'm Elijah Novak, sous chef. I understand you're a regular with us." The woman looked up, her gray eyes showing mild surprise but no intimidation. She appeared younger up close, perhaps in her late 30s, with streaks of silver in her dark hair that seemed premature rather than age-appropriate. "Josephine Thibault," she replied, her voice carrying a slight accent he couldn't place. "And yes, I suppose 4 weeks qualifies as regular." "I prepared your bouillabaisse last week," Elijah said, cutting to the chase. "You left a note." A small smile touched her lips. "Did I? I don't recall." "You said it had too much saffron." "Did I say that?" Josephine's eyes held a quiet amusement. How presumptuous of me. Elijah felt off balance, unused to being challenged. "You also said it lacked soul." "Ah," she nodded slowly. "That sounds more like something I would say." She studied him for a moment. "Tell me, Chef Novak, what do you recommend tonight? Something with soul, perhaps?" The question was a trap, and Elijah knew it. Recommending anything would open his work to her critique. Not recommending would be admitting defeat. "The bouillabaisse," he said with sudden decision. "I've made some adjustments." Something like approval flickered across her face. "Then I'll have the bouillabaisse." Throughout service, Elijah found himself distracted, waiting for Josephine's reaction. He prepared her dish himself, reducing the saffron, layering the flavors more carefully, adding a final touch of fresh herbs that wasn't in the official recipe. When Danielle returned from serving the dish, Elijah immediately asked, "Well, did she say anything?" Danielle shook her head. "She just nodded and started eating." For the next 40 minutes, Elijah found excuses to pass by the service window, glancing at table 7. Josephine ate slowly, thoughtfully, occasionally making notes in a small black notebook, something she hadn't done before. When she finally finished, Elijah could stand it no longer. He approached her table again as she was sipping the last of her sparkling water. "Was it more to your liking?" he asked, attempting to sound casual rather than desperate for approval. Josephine closed her notebook. "You reduced the saffron? Good. The fish was fresher, the stock more developed." She paused. "There was something else. Fennel pollen?" Elijah blinked in surprise. Few people could identify that subtle addition. "Yes, just a touch." Interesting choice. She gathered her things. "The technique was excellent, Chef Novak, but I'm still not sure I taste you in it." "What does that even mean?" he asked, frustration breaking through his professional veneer. Josephine stood, tucking her notebook into an expensive leather bag that Elijah suddenly realized was far nicer than he'd initially noticed. "Great cooking isn't just execution, it's autobiography." She met his eyes directly. "What's your story, chef? Because it's not in your food yet." With that, she left him standing beside the empty table, utterly perplexed. On her plate, tucked beneath the napkin, was another note. "Better. Next week, cook something that isn't on the menu, something that matters to you." That night, Chef Moreau called Elijah into his office after service. "You spoke with the woman at table 7, he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Elijah admitted. "She left a critique last week. I wanted to—" "Do you know who she is?" Moreau interrupted. "Josephine T. Bolt," Elijah replied. "Should I know her?" Moreau leaned back in his chair, studying Elijah with newfound interest. "Perhaps it's better that you don't." He paused. "She requested you personally for next week's service." "She did?" I said yes. Moreau's expression was unreadable. "Consider it a test, Elijah. One I suggest you take very seriously." As Elijah left the restaurant that night, snow falling more heavily now, he pulled out his phone and searched for Josephine T. Bolt and food. What appeared on his screen made him stop dead in his tracks, snowflakes gathering on his shocked face. A quiet mentorship. The kitchen staff of Maison Dorée noticed the change in Elijah gradually. The cutting remarks became less frequent, the explosive outbursts over minor mistakes all but disappeared. More surprisingly, he began asking for opinions. First, from Chef Moreau, then from the line cooks, even the dishwashers. "What happened to him?" Danielle whispered to Pascal one evening, watching Elijah patiently demonstrate a technique to a new prep cook. "It's like someone performed an exorcism." "I think it's that Tuesday woman," Pascal replied. "Ever since he started cooking special dishes for her, he's been different." Indeed, Tuesdays had become the highlight of Elijah's professional week. Each visit from Josephine meant a new challenge. She never requested specific dishes, instead, leaving cryptic notes, "Something you've never dared to make before," or "A dish that reminds you of your greatest mistake." On a snowy evening in December, after the restaurant had closed and most staff had gone, Elijah found Josephine still sitting at her table, nursing a glass of cognac Chef Moreau had sent to her table. "May I join you?" Elijah asked, untying his apron. She gestured to the empty chair. "You look tired, Chef Novak." "Elijah, please," he said, sitting heavily. "And yes, Chef Moreau has been pushing me harder lately." "Because you're improving," Josephine observed. "You're becoming the chef he always thought you could be." Elijah studied her face, noticing the fine lines around her eyes, the elegant silver streaks in her dark hair. "Can I ask you something personal?" She raised an eyebrow. "You can ask." "Why did you choose to mentor me?" I wasn't kind. I mocked you before I knew who you were." Josephine swirled her cognac thoughtfully. "Perhaps because of that. You reminded me of myself at your age, talented but arrogant, mistaking technique for artistry." She met his eyes. "And perhaps because I recognized something else. Loneliness." The observation struck uncomfortably close to home. Despite the constant company in the kitchen, Elijah had few real connections. His relentless pursuit of culinary perfection had left little room for meaningful relationships. "Your food was technically perfect but emotionally empty," she continued, like someone who had forgotten why they started cooking in the first place. "And why did you start?" he asked. A shadow crossed her face. "To make people happy. My father was difficult, but he smiled when he ate my food." She took a sip of cognac. "And you?" "To escape," Elijah admitted. "My family expected me to take over my father's construction business, Cooking was my rebellion. And now? He considered the question. Now, I'm not sure. It's become more complicated. Good, Josephine said with unexpected firmness. Cooking should be complicated. Life is complicated. Over the following weeks, their conversations extended beyond food. Josephine spoke of her travels, the meals that had changed her understanding, of cuisine, and eventually, hesitatingly, about Philippe and Sophie, her husband and daughter. In turn, Elijah shared his childhood in Hungary, his difficult relationship with his father, his ambitious dreams. One Tuesday in January, Josephine didn't appear at her usual time. Elijah found himself checking the door repeatedly, a growing unease in his stomach. When 9 o'clock came with no sign of her, he asked Danielle to cover for him and walked to the address he'd found in Josephine's reservation details, an elegant townhouse in Old Montreal. After several minutes of knocking, the door opened to reveal Josephine pale and wrapped in a thick robe. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice hoarse. "You missed dinner," Elijah replied simply. "I was worried." She sighed, then stepped aside to let him in. The home was beautiful but sparsely furnished, as if its owner hadn't fully moved in despite having lived there for years. "It's just a cold," Josephine said, settling onto a sofa in the living room. "Nothing serious." Elijah surveyed the kitchen, visible through an archway, modern, immaculate, and showing no signs of use. "Have you eaten today?" She waved a dismissive hand. "I'm not hungry." Without asking permission, Elijah moved to her kitchen, opening cupboards and the refrigerator, finding them nearly empty. "I'll be back in an hour," he said, grabbing his coat. He returned with bags of groceries and set to work in her kitchen, preparing a simple chicken soup, fragrant with herbs and lemon. As he cooked, Josephine watched from the doorway, wrapped in a blanket. "You don't need to do this," she said quietly. "I know," Elijah replied, not looking up from his chopping. "But food is connection, isn't it? That's what you taught me." When he placed the steaming bowl before her, Josephine looked at it for a long moment before taking a spoonful. "It's good," she said, and something in her voice made Elijah look up. Sharply, there were tears in her eyes. "What's wrong?" he asked, alarmed. "Is it too salty?" She shook her head, a small laugh escaping despite the tears. "No, Elijah, it's perfect. It's just, no one has cooked for me since they died." Understanding dawned, and Elijah sat beside her on the sofa, closer than he'd ever been to her. "Then it's about time someone did." The opening night spring arrived in Montreal, melting the last remnants of snow and bringing with it an unexpected opportunity. Chef Moreau called Elijah into his office one morning, a serious expression on his face. "I've been offered a position overseeing a new restaurant group in Paris," he said without preamble. "I've accepted." Elijah's stomach dropped. "You're leaving Maison Dorée?" "The restaurant is being sold," Moreau confirmed, "but the new owners are interested in keeping the staff, with you as head chef if you're willing." The promotion would have been a dream come true 6 months earlier. Now, Elijah found himself hesitating. "Can I think about it?" That evening, he shared the news with Josephine over dinner at her home. Their Tuesday ritual had evolved, with Elijah often cooking for both of them at her townhouse instead of at the restaurant. "You don't seem as excited as I would expect," she observed, refilling their wine glasses. "I'm not sure it's what I want anymore," Elijah admitted. "Continuing someone else's vision." Josephine studied him over the rim of her glass. "What do you want then?" The question hung in the air. Between them, charged with possibilities neither had acknowledged. Their relationship had evolved beyond mentor and student, but its exact nature remained undefined, complicated by their age difference, her grief, his ambition. "I want my own place," Elijah said finally. "Something small, personal, where I can cook food that means something. Josephine nodded slowly. I know a space that might be available. A former bakery in Little Italy. Nothing fancy, but it has potential. 2 weeks later, Elijah stood in the empty storefront, envisioning what it could become. High ceilings, exposed. Brick, large windows facing the street. Modest but inviting. Josephine watched him from the doorway. "What would you call it?" she asked. "Paprika," he said without hesitation. Simple, but meaningful. The next months passed in a blur of activity. Elijah declined the head chef position at Maison Dorée, instead bringing Pascal and Danielle with him to his new venture. Josephine provided introductions to suppliers, investors, and media contacts, though she insisted on remaining officially uninvolved. "This is your story," she told him, "not mine." Yet she was present for every major decision, her experience, and palate guiding Elijah through the maze of opening a restaurant. The menu they developed together was neither strictly Hungarian nor French, but a personal fusion reflecting Elijah's journey. Comfort foods elevated through technique, luxury, ingredients treated with rustic respect. On the night before the grand opening, Elijah worked late, perfecting the final details of the menu. When he finally emerged from the kitchen, he found Josephine sitting alone in the dining room, a glass of wine before her. "It's perfect," she said, gesturing around the space. "Everything is ready." Elijah sat across from her, suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they'd created together. "I couldn't have done this without you." "Yes, you could have," she countered. "Perhaps not as quickly, but you would have found your way eventually." "Why did you help me?" he asked, the question that had lingered between them for months. Josephine was quiet for a long moment. "When Philippe and Sophie died, I lost my purpose. Food became meaningless. I couldn't taste anything, couldn't feel anything." She met his eyes. "Until your bouillabaisse. Even with too much saffron, it made me feel something again." Elijah reached across the table, taking her hand. "And now," she said softly, "I remember why food matters. It's never just about feeding the body." The opening night of Paprika was a controlled chaos of excitement and anxiety. The small dining room filled quickly with food critics, industry professionals, and curious locals. In the kitchen, Elijah moved with a focused calm that surprised even himself, directing his small team with confidence and patience. Midway through service, Danielle approached him with wide eyes. "Table 9 is asking for you." Elijah looked out through the service window to see Josephine seated at a corner table, surrounded by several of Montreal's most prominent food writers. His heart raced as he approached their table. "Ladies and gentlemen," Josephine said as he arrived, "allow me to introduce Elijah Novak, the chef and owner of Paprika." Questions came from all directions about his concept, his background, his inspirations. Elijah answered thoughtfully, with none of the defensive arrogance that would have characterized him a year earlier. "And Ms. Thibault," one writer asked, "is it true this is your first public appearance at a restaurant opening since your retirement?" Josephine's eyes met Elijah's. "Some restaurants deserve to be celebrated," she said simply. "Some chefs remind us why we fall in love with food in the first place." Later that night, after the last guests had departed and the staff had gone home with well-deserved congratulations, Elijah and Josephine sat alone at the bar, sharing a bottle of champagne. "To Paprika," she toasted. "May it feed both body and soul." "To finding connection," Elijah countered, "through food and second chances." Their glasses clinked in the quiet restaurant. Outside, Montreal was coming alive with spring, new beginnings unfolding with each passing day. Elijah looked at Josephine, this remarkable woman who had entered his life disguised as a lonely diner, who had seen through his arrogance to the chef he could become, who had helped him find his voice through food. "What happens now?" he asked, suddenly uncertain. Josephine smiled, the full, genuine smile that had once been rare but now appeared more frequently. "Now, Elijah Novak, we eat, we cook, we live." She took his hand, her fingers warm against his. "And we see where the next course takes us." In the kitchen, the pilot light of the stove glowed steadily, ready for tomorrow's creations. Outside, the sign for Paprika cast a warm light onto the street, inviting new stories to unfold within its walls. The Revelation. The article that appeared on Elijah's phone screen was from a culinary magazine dated 3 years earlier. Culinary world mourns as Josephine Thibault announces retirement. Below it was a photo, unmistakably the woman from Table 7, though with longer hair and a more vibrant expression, standing in a Parisian kitchen beside several renowned chefs. Elijah spent the next day in a state of distracted shock, reading everything he could find about Josephine Thibault. Born in Marseille, trained at Institut Paul Bocuse, she had become one of the most influential food writers in Europe before abruptly retiring following the death of her husband and daughter in a boating accident off the coast of Nova Scotia. Her reviews had made and broken restaurants across France, Italy, and later North America. Chefs both feared and revered her palate, her technical knowledge, and her unflinching honesty. And now she was eating his bouillabaisse every Tuesday. "You look like you've seen a ghost," remarked Pascal when Elijah arrived at work the following day, dark circles under his eyes from a night of minimal sleep. "Something like that," Elijah muttered, his mind racing through the implications. Had Josephine Thibault been secretly reviewing Maison Dorée? Was Chef Moreau aware of her identity all along? And most pressingly, what should he cook for her that wasn't on the menu? Throughout the week, Elijah found himself questioning everything he'd taken for granted about his cooking. He'd always prided himself on technical perfection, on mastering the French techniques that had been the foundation of his training. But Josephine's words haunted him. "I'm still not sure I taste you in it." What did that even mean? Cooking was about precision, about consistency, about meeting established standards, wasn't it? By Sunday night, Elijah was in his small apartment kitchen, surrounded by ingredients, attempting dish after dish from his childhood in Eastern Europe before his family had immigrated to Canada. His grandmother's pierogi, his mother's goulash, foods he hadn't cooked in years, deemed too simple, too rustic for his professional aspirations. Tuesday arrived, and with it, Josephine Thibault, at exactly 7:30 p.m. When Danielle informed him of her arrival, Elijah was already prepared, having arrived at the restaurant 4 hours early to prepare his off-menu creation. "Good evening," he said, approaching her table with more confidence than he felt. "I understand you're expecting something special tonight." Josephine looked up, those perceptive gray eyes studying him. "I'm expecting something honest, Chef Novak. There's a difference." Elijah nodded. "I've prepared something that isn't on our menu. It may not meet your expectations of fine dining, but bring it," she said simply. He returned to the kitchen, where a copper pot simmered with a dish he hadn't cooked since culinary school. His grandmother's paprikash, made with rabbit. Instead of the traditional chicken, served over hand-rolled spätzle with a dollop of crème fraîche and fresh dill. Simple food, elevated through technique, but fundamentally unchanged from the dish that had comforted him as a child. When he placed it before her, Josephine's expression remained neutral, but her eyes registered something. Recognition, perhaps. She inhaled the aroma, then looked up at him. "Tell me about this dish," she said quietly. "It's rabbit paprikash," Elijah explained, suddenly feeling exposed. "My grandmother made it every Sunday. After she died, my mother continued the tradition." He hesitated. "It was the last thing she cooked for me before I left for culinary school. I told her I was done with peasant food." Josephine nodded slowly, then took a bite. Her eyes closed briefly, and when they opened, there was something softer in them. "This," she said after swallowing, "has soul." Something in Elijah's chest loosened. A tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. "Thank you." "Sit." She gestured to the chair across from her. "For 5 minutes. The kitchen can survive." Hesitantly, Elijah sat. Around them, other diners cast curious glances, unused to seeing a chef in the dining room. "Do you know who I am?" Josephine asked directly. "Yes," Elijah admitted. "I looked you up after last week." "And what did you learn?" "That you are one of the most respected food writers in the world. That you retired 3 years ago after—" He trailed off, not wanting to mention the tragedy. "After my family died," she finished for him, matter-of-factly. "Yes. And now I am just a woman who eats alone on Tuesdays." "Why here?" Elijah couldn't help asking. "Why Maison Dorée?" Josephine took another bite before answering. "Your chef Moreau and I trained together many years ago. When I moved to Montreal, he invited me. I come because—" She paused, considering her words. "Because food is the only thing that still makes me feel connected to the world." Elijah felt a sudden unwelcome lump in his throat. "And my bouillabaisse?" A small smile touched her lips. "It needed work. This," she gestured to the paprikash, "does not."